So I decided to do this video because of, the private comments and public comments that I received on my last video. What I did is that I may have put too many concepts in one 13-minute video, and the reason why I did that is because, from my perspective, I took basically my legal understanding for granted. It's not something that's common knowledge, the legal profession, as far as what the laws are and what case law is. So, there were too many concepts that I was trying to cram in 13 minutes. So what I'm going to do is just deal with two issues. I'm going to deal with why there's no discrimination when it comes to gay marriage, and why marriage between a man and a woman is fundamental. Now, a lot of people, especially the homosexual supporters, tend to say, well, the Supreme Court has spoken. Well, the Supreme Court has been wrong, and they have said that themselves. This is not me saying this, themselves. Plessy versus Ferguson, for instance, a couple of the cases that involved the Japanese citizens during World War II. That also were other cases where the Supreme Court was actually wrong, and they've reversed themselves. So the fact that the Supreme Court now has said what they have said doesn't necessarily mean they're correct about it. Okay? So beginning with why there's no discrimination. Well, before we get into why there's no discrimination, let's look at some historical cases. For instance, we could look at, I'm going to look on the internet here for most of the historical cases, which I already know of. For instance, Shelley versus Kramer. In my last video, I was trying to explain that discrimination happens where you deny some particular right, and it has to be a particular specific right to one individual that is afforded to another individual or group of people. And in my example, I used voting. There were men voting, and they were denying certain men the right to vote. And the reasons why they were doing it was for some arbitrary reason. Now let's look at some historical cases so you get an understanding of what discrimination really is. For instance, Shelley versus Kramer. This is in 1948, and this is basically a case that deals with covenants or agreements not to sell to people of African American descent. Now, the problem here is that you could sell to anybody but black people. So what's a discrimination? It's discrimination against black people, right? When other people of other races could have purchased. So a white man could have purchased a home in this neighborhood, but a black man couldn't. Now you see it? So in Shelley versus Kramer, they went to the Supreme Court and they realized, well, denying someone the right to buy something based on race is unconstitutional because you're being discriminatory, and the reasons why you're being discriminatory, some arbitrary reason, race. That's almost like saying fat people aren't allowed to buy, or people with blue eyes aren't allowed to buy, or blondes, or brunettes, or redheads. Other famous examples are the Irish need not apply. This happened in the early 1900s. People of Irish descent were denied the right to do something. Okay, when people that look just like them and were just as qualified were able to do the same thing. So we can also look at, Brown versus Board of Education. Now, there's two cases there, and that was really going against the separate but equal concept. You had people, white students, apply to schools, and they took their exams. They completed high school. They applied, they took the prerequisite test, and they were allowed to go to college or to higher education institutions. Black people that would do the exact same thing weren't allowed. And the reason why they weren't allowed was because of their skin color. That's racism. Now let's look at Loving versus Virginia, which is a 1967 case. And in Loving versus Virginia, black man wasn't allowed to marry a white woman when there were other people marrying outside their races. So do you see that discrimination in order to discriminate, there has to be some right that's afforded to other people, and then the thing that keeps the people that are being discriminated against from participating is some arbitrary thing. Now, when you look at these cases, you could do your research, read those cases. There's something consistent here. Other people were afforded the rights. Same thing with voting. There were other people voting. Now, when I did my last video, I kind of got some comments saying, well, you know, if nobody, if basically saying that when it came to voting, no black was able to vote. So it's not discrimination because no black people were able to vote. Well, you see, that's why I say racism is a mental illness, is because people don't really understand that the fact is that other men were voting. If no one has the right to vote, then you can't discriminate. But people had the right to vote. White men had a right to vote. The Constitution, or really the preamble to the Constitution, which really sets the bounds for what the Constitution is, says all men are created equal. Right? That's what the foundation of the Constitution is all about. That you can't make distinctions between men as in like size, race, that sort of thing. It's arbitrary. So there were other people voting. There were whites going to school. They were doing the things that they were doing like I just described. Here, when it comes to homosexual marriage, no one, if we start from square one, had a right to enter into a contract or into a marriage with a person of the same sex. So there's no discrimination there, right? It would only be discrimination if other people were allowed to do it, whatever that group is. If there were other people allowed to enter into a same kind of contract, right, with another man and call it marriage. That's never been so. So there's no discrimination. What we have here is actually the creation of a right, not the preservation of a right. It's a creation. What the homosexuals did is created a new type of contract and said it's called discrimination. So that's what's different. You look at every single discrimination case. The person being discriminated against wanted to do something the exact same way everybody else was. And that's why I said in the last video, blacks wanted to go to school like everybody else. They didn't want to change anything. They wanted to vote like everybody else. They didn't want to change anything. You see, the homosexuals are changing something. They're now changing marriage from between two people of opposite sex, a man and a woman, to be able to say, you know, a man and a man or a woman on a woman. That never happened before, right? And the institution that allowed you to, you know, enter in this contract with a person of the opposite sex has nothing to do with discriminating against anybody because of their sexual preference. Anybody's allowed to do that, so long as you reach the right age or whatever, and you make that decision to get into that, and you do it freely. All right, that's open to everyone. There's no discrimination there. What gays want to do is create something new. That's like black people saying, hey, you know, I'm not being denied. I'm denied the right to vote, and I can't vote. So you know what? Since I'm being discriminated against, and then the remedy they propose is saying, well, I want to vote on Wednesday after the tallies are in, or I want to do something that's different. You know, I want my vote to count twice, or I want to be able to see other people's vote. No, they wanted to do everything the exact same way. So every single discrimination case that you can look at, you will see that no one's trying to change the fundamentals. Here, they're trying to change the fundamentals. The message was originally for Kim Davis, and what I want to say to Kim Davis is that this religious freedom aspect is a trap, and you're going to lose. You can't make that argument. You got to make subject matter a subject matter jurisdiction argument. You have to say the Supreme Court had no jurisdiction to hear it, and there was no discrimination. If you take the route of saying it's a religious freedom aspect, you're going to lose. And let me give you an example. If you're familiar with Hinduism, there's a caste system in Hinduism. And in this caste system, there's like three castes, like first, second, and third, right? And in their religion, they discriminate against people of other castes. In their religion, being in the highest caste is superior than being in a lower caste. Like you can't even, do certain jobs because of what caste you belong in or do certain things. So could a Hindu say, well, now, I'm in America and it's against my religion to treat a person of a lower class equally? No, we can't do that in America. So the religious argument is going to fail. It's going to fail. There's all kinds of religions out there. Not all religions are, based on Christianity or concepts of equality. There are other religions that endorse separation. So going down that route is going to pretty much lead to destruction, and you're not going to win. I'm telling you that right now. You're not going to win. This is a trap. Sometimes I feel like both sides are in on it. They like it's just this kind of agenda thing. But anyhow, that's another video. I'm not going to veer off like I said I wasn't going to do. Now, to touch on the last thing, what makes the traditional marriage fundamental as opposed to between a man and a man? There's a big difference. The difference is that when a man and woman come together, they produce something, okay? It's necessary, right? Because now you can bring it's necessary to perpetuate society because you have kids, you raise them. It's the best way to raise kids. Everybody knows the best way to raise kids is to raise your own flesh and blood, right? And to have one wife, one husband. Other formats of child raising is not great because if you had two wives, there's generally problems. If you have two husbands, there's generally problems. The saying, you can't serve two kings? Well, you just can't have two wives because you're always going to love one more than the other. It's impossible to love people the same. If you love them the same, it's just impossible. You can't love people the same. There's always one that is more favored than the other. And we know that, and history has proven that. So that's why it's fundamental. If you deny the right of a man and woman to come together and raise a family, society would pretty much fall apart. And it is the foundation of society. So that's what makes it more fundamental. Two men can't do anything. They're fundamentally different than a man and a woman. Two men, what could they do? Maybe they can adopt some kids or whatever. It's not going to be their own flesh and blood. Maybe they could, but that's getting into their private issue. But the point is that setup is inferior to a man and a woman because as a man I couldn't tell. I could read about raising women or how a woman would feel, or if I had a daughter, her first period and stuff, and having to explain that kind of stuff. I could read about it, but I'm not a woman. I won't be able to explain it as well as a woman. So not only does the marriage fundamentally different, it also respects both roles because both roles are necessary. There's a necessary role for men in raising children, and there's a necessary role for women in raising children. And it teaches that there's a mutual respect, and we need each other. Now, this homosexual thing, they're basically saying, no, we don't need women, or we don't need men. Two men can do the same job as a man and a woman. That's not true, and we know that's not true. A man and a woman is just superior to a man and a man, or a woman and a woman, because you have the best of two worlds. Now, is every single couple, perfect? No, they're not. They're not. But that doesn't mean that we should just turn over things to, this experiment, because that's really what it is. It's an experiment. It's never happened before. Now, you see, when you look at race discrimination and stuff, prior to the laws of Loving versus Virginia and all these things, black people, white people were getting married all the time. Why do you think they made it illegal? They really made it illegal to preserve slavery, because if Uncle Charlie was black and there's propaganda going around that black people are animals, and you knew Uncle Charlie, who was a black man, you'd be less likely to believe that rhetoric. That's why America's separated. They put blacks on this side, whites on this side, is to keep people apart, because that's the best way to promote propaganda and hate and just, all that kind of stuff. When you're dealing with people and you're interacting with people, it's harder to sell that kind of stuff. So, that's the difference. That's the difference. So, like I said, for discrimination to happen, you have to deny a particular right to a person. There's no discrimination. Gay people can get married just like everybody else. They can. If I were homosexual, I could get married to a woman. There's nothing stopping me. That's not discrimination. What homosexuals are doing is creating a new right, and that is not discrimination. I hope this video helps you. I mean, if you think I'm wrong, in the comment section, please, down here, please show me a case where it's a discrimination case and a right is being denied and the person wants to do it in a fundamentally different way. Show me that. Show me where, like for instance in voting, where they were like, oh, you're discriminating against a particular race, for any arbitrary reason, and they want to do it a different way. In every single discrimination case, they wanted to do it the established way. So I hope this video helps, and take care.